so much for joining us. Additionally, thanks for your flexibility in order to ensure we could be as inclusive as possible with timing. Being part of a global community means that some of us started our days earlier than usual, and others of us are ending our days much later than usual in order to join this community town hall. We thank you so much for being part of this important forum. With that said, I think we should get started. We are joined today by several academic affairs leaders and colleagues who will share more details about this initiative. Before you hear from them, I have a few housekeeping notes to share. First, our panelists will be happy to answer your questions later in the program. To submit a question, please take a moment to locate the chat feature on your Zoom toolbar. Click the chat button and send us your questions. Nikki Ajete, Associate Vice President of Academic Strategic Operations, will be facilitating today's chat. Next, you may click the closed caption live transcript button in the toolbar to turn on or turn off captioning for this program. You can use your smartphone to snap a photo of the QR code located at the bottom of each slide to access the SharePoint site for the Academic Affairs Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative. This site will be continuously updated with additional resources and project updates. As a final note, this program is being recorded and will be available to you beginning later this week, along with additional resources related to this initiative. Happy Tuesday. My name is Jarrett Carter. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm Associate Vice President for Integrative Learning Design. I'm one of 3 co-leads for starting up this initiative. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is very near and dear to my heart. We've come such a long way from higher education being outwardly exclusionary, and yet there remains much work to be done. If we are to be an organization that prioritizes the success of our students, our faculty, and our staff, we must engage in the work of engendering a community where everyone feels valued. I'm excited to be a part of this work, and I hope you are too. As I said, I am one of 3 co-leads. Next, I want you to meet Pam Carter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Carter, pronouns she, her, and hers, and I'm Vice President and Dean of the School of Business. I also serve as one of the co-leads for this initiative. I come from a long line of educators, including my great-grandfather, who became head of the Department of Mechanics at North Carolina A&T in 1902. Many decades later, however, I have experienced a range of discriminatory behaviors and actions as a student, a faculty member, and an administrator in post-secondary education. As a result, I am passionate about creating environments where everyone can thrive and feel they belong. I see my role in this project as working towards this goal, and I look forward to working with all of you. Next, I want you to meet Sharon Frost.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. As many of you know, I'm Sharon Frost. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm Vice President and Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences and one of the co-leads of this project. Like many of us on this call, I have many reasons, personal and professional reasons and experiences for why I'm deeply committed to DEI. As a multiracial, ethnic, and cultural community, it's imperative that we undertake deliberate work, both individually and collectively, if we're really truly to have a community that includes everyone. So I'm committed to the learning that we'll undertake together and to fostering a community where everyone is consciously included. Jarrett, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Pam and Sharon. We're eager to share with you, so let's dive right in. We're grateful to have a wonderful executive sponsorship and support all along the way. To speak to this, I'm turning it over to Blakely Palmietto, who is our Chief Academic Officer and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs. Turning it over to you, Blakely.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As Jarrett said, I'm Blakely Palmietto, pronouns she, her, hers. And I am so pleased to see so many academic affairs colleagues from around the globe joining us for this webinar. I think it's a clear indication of our community's interest and need for a focus and engagement with the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging. As an institution, the university's strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion provides us with a shared framework for fostering the kind of institutional community that celebrates and advances the full breadth of voices, perspectives, cultures, lived experiences, and other dimensions of diversity. However, as the academic affairs community, we have a special obligation to not only be part of the institutional effort, but to reflect this core value throughout our curricula. This requires a focus on both our organizational and workplace culture, in addition to all aspects of our approach to teaching and learning. Concerted attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion is central to realizing UMGC's potential and our mission. That mission explicitly calls for us to provide access to a quality education. And to achieve this, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a critical enabler of both accessibility and quality. I am sure all of you know that accessibility is far more than compliance with laws and regulations that ensure differently abled individuals have equal access to our learning experiences. Accessibility in our curricula also means that all aspects of that learning experience, from the imagery to the language that's used in the classroom, to the applied examples in the workplace context, to the way our faculty engage with learners, in all of these aspects and more, we are deliberate and intentional in making sure all students feel seen, feel heard, and supported, and they believe that they can succeed and succeed with us. DEI is equally important to ensuring that we provide our students with a quality education. We look around and see that we live in ever more global communities, societies, and economies, and providing a quality education also means that we must prepare students to live, work, and operate in these contexts. We have an obligation to prepare graduates to not only appreciate how diversity of experience and perspectives contributes to critical thinking and analysis, to creative thinking, to problem solving, to teamwork, and other essential skills, but we must also prepare them to proactively seek out diverse perspectives, to build diverse teams and communities of their own, to be able to create and foster inclusive environments through which the transformational power of diversity can be fully realized. In order to do all of this for our students, we must focus internally on our own community of faculty and staff. We must build our capacity and culture to enable us to do this work for our students. We must create the internal infrastructure and a culture that invites and values all forms of diversity and the ways in which it contributes to the richness of our community. A great deal of work has been done to lay a foundation for diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the academic affairs community. Some of this work has been undertaken proactively, specifically by you, many members of the academic affairs community, and it predates even the university's strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our work together with the university plan will continue to inform how we think about faculty, staff, and student engagement, how we think about curriculum, instruction, and student centricity, and the importance of building an inclusive and equitable academic affairs community. Our goal for the first academic affairs strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion is one that provides us with a roadmap for action and which builds capacity for a sustained commitment. Such a plan will move our community beyond cultural awareness and beyond cultural competence to a place of cultural responsiveness in which all faculty, all staff, and all students have the ability to respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, disabilities, religions, genders, sexual orientations, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values their worth. An inclusive process in which all members of our community can contribute is imperative if this is to be a meaningful and plan that is reflective of our whole community. So we have deliberately undertaken a thoughtful and measured approach to this work, and it began with your input to the survey we created this past summer. Your responses to the survey have helped us to understand your most significant concerns and questions, your opinions and understandings as to what defines and constitutes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and about your own lived experiences that influence how you do and want to engage in this work. On behalf of myself and our project co-leads, I want you to know how much we appreciate not only the time that you invested in completing the survey, but also how deeply we respect the candor and openness that was reflected in your responses. All of your input matters, and it has been and will continue to be carefully considered as our work progresses. As part of our commitment to transparency and inclusion in this work, I want to remind you that we have established a SharePoint site, which was addressed earlier and we will remind you about throughout the webinar. This site will serve as a hub for our whole community to stay up to date on this work, including additional opportunities for how each of you can participate. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Norm Jones. Norm is Chief Executive Officer of Integrated Diversity, LLC. He has established deep expertise and credibility as a diversity and inclusion leader in institutions of higher education. As Harvard's inaugural Associate Chief Diversity Officer and Deputy Director in the Office of the Special Assistant to the President, Norm helped establish Harvard's first Office of Diversity and Inclusion, while also overseeing the day-to-day operations of several other offices, including Title IX, Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity, and Disability Services. He also served as the inaugural Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Amherst College, where he oversaw the Office of Student Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, the Office of Faculty Equity and Inclusion, the Office of Workforce Equity and Inclusive Leadership, and the Office of Academic and Engagement and Student Success. His diversity and inclusion work is grounded in his own education and public administration, workforce education and development, and organizational development. I am delighted to have his partnership and his guidance as an external facilitator for our academic affairs, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic planning process. I hope you will agree that he brings valuable experience and perspective to our work to help us build inclusive structures to organize our work across this time and space, and to build an evaluable plan against which together we can measure our progress, celebrate our successes, and hold ourselves accountable for achieving our shared goals. Norm, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Blakely. Again, my name is Norm Jones. I use he, him pronouns, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. As this Venn diagram illustrates, the approach to DEI strategic planning will focus on three primary domains: data, process, and building community capacity. On the SharePoint site, you can find the working definitions we're using for diversity, equity, and inclusion as three very distinct domains that undergird the work of strategic planning. My role as an outside facilitator is to support the members of the working group as they engage with you, the entire academic affairs community. In so doing, we're seeking to anchor all of this work in the data gleaned from the survey to which many of you responded, so thank you again for that, as well as previous sources of information and data collection. As Blakely mentioned, and I have truly appreciated, we recognize that this work of DEI has been going on before this endeavor was launched, and we are considering all of those resources and the information that we gleaned from that work. We're also looking at sources of data collection and creating a process of community engagement that feels and is inclusive and equitable in terms of how, when, and where community members are extended opportunities to give insight and feedback. And finally, to strengthen connections between and among community members who are helping to build a solid and sustainable plan. During the appropriate time, I look forward to answering any questions you may have about this diagram as a guiding framework for our strategic planning work. It is so important, so critical to ensure that this work is well integrated. And with that, I will turn it over to Dara McNally to speak more about the data that will help shape the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Blakely mentioned, back in June, we invited all academic affairs staff and full-time faculty to participate in a brief survey. The goal of the survey was really to see how people would like to participate and what support they would need to be able to participate fully in this process. So we had 177 participants, which was a response rate of about 75%. So I think that really speaks to the enthusiasm for this work and its importance. So I would just echo Blakely and Norman saying thank you for taking the time to participate in that. Because although it was only 4 questions, there was 2 open text questions, which I know takes a little bit of time and mental energy. And all of these data were recorded anonymously, which I think contributed to the candor that Blakely also mentioned. Next slide. So we began by giving the definitions of DEI that Norm mentioned that are being used as the working definitions for this DEI process, and identifying the opportunity areas that the group had come up with, which are the 7 areas you see here. So we're talking about program and course pedagogy, workplace culture and climate, the classroom culture, faculty diversity, DEI courses and certifications, engagement with the community, and identifying and addressing student success equity and gaps, equity gaps. So the question was, what are we missing here? What are the other areas that should be considered for this process? On the next slide, we see there were 5 that really jumped out as themes from the responses. People were most concerned about training for faculty and staff around DEI. People also wanted curated resources, which was really people indicating that they want to know more about this, they want to be involved, but it would be great to know where to start. So having things from books, podcasts just listed somewhere so that people can easily know what resources are worthwhile and where they should start would be a big help to people. Ensuring diversity and staffing at UMGC, a lot of people mentioned that we should make sure that we as an institution reflect the diverse student population which we serve. There was concern about including accessibility issues. And I think this theme really gets to the importance that people saw in having DEI, ensuring that our DEI approach is very broad and no group is excluded. So accessibility issues in particular, people mentioned as wanting to be included in this process. And of course, DEI in UMDC programs and curricula, which was already in there, but I think because it's so important, it was echoed in the themes that people took the time to write out as well. Next slide, please. So we also asked people to indicate in what types of sessions they would like to participate, right? So most people said they would be interested in a results session, which of course, we're all interested in the results of the process. People also indicated planning session and provide feedback. There's not a whole lot between this. I think people are generally interested in all aspects of the process is what we can take from this. Not many people wrote into the other category, but I think what was in there was really people taking the chance to say, we want to be involved in this and it should be a transparent process. So several people mentioned this should not be a top-down process. This should be something where the community is really involved, people's voices are really heard. And it's not something that can be done behind closed doors, which I think we've also heard. This is very important to the organizers of this group. So I think that's great to see that we're kind of on the same page there. On next slide, we asked, would people like to participate in synchronous or asynchronous? Unsurprisingly, I think most people said both. Very few people said synchronous only. I think just reflects the world we live in, the way we work now. But again, this is something that will be taken into consideration when planning the events going forward. So the last question, and this is where I'm going to hand it over to Dean Pam Carter. The last question was thinking about the ways you might want to participate in this process. What type of information or support do you think you would need? And this can include anything you feel you might need to participate fully in the process. So this was an open text question, and we had 6 categories that came out of the analysis of this text. And I'm going to hand it over to Dean Carter to explain how those 6 categories are going to inform the next steps of the process.
Thanks, Dara. So as he mentioned, our starting place were the 6 categories that came out of the data. The working group went through all of the narrative responses for the survey so that we could better understand what you all were telling us. And as a result, the 6 categories ended up being activities, events, and resources, student and classroom focused activity, structure and scope of what that DEI initiative should entail, collaboration opportunities for working in DEI space, faculty and staff focused issues needed to be addressed in this strategic plan, as well as all forms of data and looking at what the data tells us and how we can act on it. Next slide. And so from these 6 categories, we decided, given these were the responses, these were the opportunities that were highlighted as most important by you all, these 6 categories are going to form the actual 6 goals of the strategic plan for the academic affairs DEI work going forward for the next 3 years. And so our strategic plan will be for the years 2023 through 2026. That will be what we're working to accomplish. And the 6 goals will be reflective of those 6 categories. For each goal, the idea is we will have a goal that will reflect each one of those categories, and then each goal will have measurable objectives that are created that we can use to guide our work so that we make sure that we achieve the goal. So we'll have working groups that are going to work on each goal and create, next slide, measurable objectives. And we find this to be key. The objectives have to be measurable because this is going to be a living document that we go back to and reference throughout the 3 years. And we want to make sure it's not just a document that sits in place, but that we're working towards and we will be measuring our progress against and hold ourselves accountable. So each goal will have objectives that are measurable, and it'll be determined at the time how they will be measured. And then for each objective, there'll be proposed activities that can be worked on to achieve each of those objectives. Next slide. And so the idea will be to form working groups for each goal. And this is where we start talking about how we would like you all to participate. So there will be a working group for each goal. And for each working group, you will have a charge of creating what is the actual language for the goal in the strategic plan for the assigned category, creating those measurable objectives and how they will be measured for each of the goals, as well as what activities to accomplish. And so we anticipate for each of those working groups, there will be 2 co-leads and 8 to 10 members. Next slide. To coordinate the work for the 6 working groups working on those goals, there will be an overall steering committee, which will be responsible for coordinating the work and information flows back and forth among the working groups. To keep the timeline that we've put in place, the goal is for us to complete our work by the end of this fiscal year, so June 2023, to ensure that the work that we do stays in alignment with the UMGC DEI strategic plan. And then also, the 3 co-leads that have been in place, myself, Sharon, and Jarrett, we will continue to serve as the co-leads. So who will make up the steering working group? Well, part of the way we coordinate will coordinate the workflows is for there to be one co-lead from each of the 6 working goals will also serve as on the steering committee. And then we will have the 3 remaining members of the initial working group, as well as 1 representative from the Academic Advisory Board, or AAB, will serve on the steering working group. Next slide. All right, so timeline. This is just a very high overview, so people will understand the breadth of work that we're trying to accomplish and the timeline. But again, I want to highlight that it's a very high timeline when I talk about what will happen during the time periods. We don't want to give the impression that we've already done all the work for the working groups. And so details about some of this work, high level outline, will be further developed by the working group members themselves. But for right now, as a recap to where we are for today, I want to emphasize that this work that we're getting ready to engage in, or to continue engaging in with you all's participation, is the Academic Affairs DEI Strategic Plan, which will be aligned with the UMGC DEI Strategic Plan. This is the working group that's going to be working on the strategic plan, not the working group that's going to do the work of the strategic plan. So that's a big distinction that we want to make. Blakely appointed co-leads and hired the consultant, as we've just been told, and introduced to Norm, who will continue working with us throughout this process. And the initial working group that was formed has brought us to today, where we are having our town hall and reporting on our work, and we will be asking for your participation going forward. So the rest of this month and for the month of December, we will be forming the working group. So hopefully we will get plenty of volunteers who want to participate. And then by the end of December, when we break for holiday, all working group members and co-leads will have been notified so that we can start work first thing in January. There'll be a co-lead orientation and then an orientation and kickoff meeting for all working group members. And the idea is by the end of February, all the goal working groups will provide a progress report to the steering working group by the end of February. So you can see we're going to be hitting the ground running and getting the work done starting right away. At the beginning of March, the steering working group is going to collect all those reports and give an overall report to Blakely, who will provide some feedback. And through the rest of the March and in April, we are planning to have a first draft of the AA DEI strategic plan developed to submit to Blakely for her feedback. She will then hold a series of feedback meetings directly with the folks who have presented her work to her so that she can give us in a collaborative and discussion manner, conversational manner, what we should be doing next to start finalizing what we're doing. Next slide. So in May and June, the working groups will incorporate Blakely's feedback, and then we will present a final draft of the Academic Affairs DEI strategic plan to our Chief Academic Officer. And then the plan at the end is that we will debrief and talk about lessons learned going forward. So looking ahead, as I've mentioned, the plan is for us to have an active living document. We're not trying to have an exercise just for the sake of having an exercise, because that would be a waste of everyone's time. So we're going to have a living document for which we're going to be held accountable. We're going to continue reporting and making sure that there's alignment with the UMGC DEI strategic plan. And for those of you who may not want to work directly on a working group, and of course there's going to be limited opportunities for that, but at the same time we want everyone who wants to participate to be involved. And so there will be ways we will be keeping everyone up to date and offering additional opportunities for participation through the AA DEI SharePoint site, as well as we have an email address that is specifically for this initiative. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to talk in more detail about that SharePoint site.
Great. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate it. We thought that it would be helpful to take you through the DEI SharePoint site to see really the breadth of the available resources and updates that will be available to you. Jess McCourty, who is Director of Academic Communications and Engagement, will drive us through the site while I describe some of the features. As you can see in front of you, this is the landing page of the DEI SharePoint site. I want to remind you that this site is not associated with the source. You'll be able to access the site via the QR code that you've seen throughout today's presentation, or by clicking on the link in the email you'll receive following today's webinar. You'll find, if you look in the left part of the screen that is showing where the countdown to today's webinar is, that's where the recording of today's webinar will be placed. There will also be regular updates, upcoming events, and news about the work that we're undertaking throughout the first part of 2023. There will also be helpful resources and information. Pam talked a bit about the estimated timeline for the initiative. When you look at that timeline, you'll be able to click on it, because while we're talking about what we're doing today and going forward, there's also, when you click on each of those red dots, you'll be able to see, work that's taken place or planning that, will take place as we move forward. It's a helpful tool. There's also information on the work that is happening and how everyone can get involved. I've seen that there's at least one, question in the chat about that. There'll also be a form that you can fill out and express your interest in getting involved. We want as many people involved as possible, because in order to really have a significant DEI strategic plan, it means we all need to be involved in that. There will also be information on the DEI working groups that you'll be able to find. You'll also find, the bios or background on each of the, individuals that, are a part of the steering work group. I want to also point out, if you hover over Norm's image, you'll be able to navigate to his company website and to see the range of work that he and his colleagues undertake there. Also, following the webinar, we're going to be taking questions that we get today, and we'll upload FAQs as well, with the webinar as well. You'll find the interactive timeline, which just took us through. And so there will also be an AADEI inbox, where if you have any questions, or comments, you can submit them. And we'll be monitoring that, closely and regularly, to provide, feedback and input into our whole process. The website really is an opportunity to learn more about the work that is happening throughout the strategic planning process, and an opportunity to engage one another. I think the thing that is important to remember, this is development of a strategic plan. From that, we'll undertake our work after we actually, have the process in place. The SharePoint site will continue to grow as we move through our timeline, and I would like to encourage you to check the site regularly for updates and resources, and to contact us if you have any questions. With that, Jarrett, I'm going to turn it back to you now.
Thank you, Sharon. So now we're going to transition over to our question and answer portion. As I mentioned earlier, Nikki Ajete will facilitate the Q&A segment of our time together. Thank you, Nikki. I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you, Jarrett. So far, a quiet group. I know Sharon addressed the question about working with participating in a working group. I believe we've covered that. You can find that information on the SharePoint site. But I encourage anyone on the call to ask their questions, and we're happy to field them. All right, brave first person. So will the plan address the issue of DEI in course design? Is that something the panel can respond to?
I can respond to that. So one of the categories that a goal will be created around is student and classroom issues, right? And so it'll be the domain and charge of that working group to determine what objectives that they're going to provide in terms of recommendation for what should be included in that strategic plan goal. So the categories are there. When we created the categories, there were issues around curriculum that led to us creating that category. So that would be where in the strategic plan, we would hope to find that addressed. So yes, the answer is yes.
And the other part of that is a part of this process that each of the academic schools and our work with integrative learning design are, looking at the curricular parts, through each of the school curriculum committees, and just, recently, each of the schools appointed designated representatives for DEI to be, sitting with the school curriculum committee. So it'll be addressed in multifacets, and looking at the curriculum.
And just to add to the integrative learning design and some of the things in our purview, we're looking at course design, on a curricular pedagogy level. We're also looking at it from a technology standpoint. And so we've actually been in conversations with D2L about some exciting features that are coming out next year. One example of which I'm very excited about, the ability to add pronouns to your D2L profile so that when you post in discussion forums, your chosen name and your preferred pronouns will show up. And as we know, simple things like that can really amplify belongingness in the course. And when we have belongingness for our students, we know that they're better positioned to be successful in the course. So we're looking at this from a very wide-ranging purview.
Thank you all. I think that was a robust answer to the question. The next question is about the time commitment. For those that do want to participate, either as a co-lead or a participant in any of the working groups, could you speak to the time commitment involved for volunteers?
So one, I think it's going to depend on the role that you have. So obviously, if you serve as a co-lead of a working group and you're the co-lead that also is going to serve on the steering working group, then that's going to be a much greater commitment than perhaps just serving as a member on a working group or choosing to participate in some of the ancillary opportunities that are going to be available. But the heaviest commitment is actually working, starts at the serving on a working group. And as you can see, I don't know exactly what the time commitment would be, but that's part of the reason we wanted to give that timeline, because between now and June 2023, we hope to have a strategic plan in place. So it's a pretty significant time commitment. But I don't know exactly how much time to say, because I don't want to say something and all of a sudden it's not it's not that. But if you can imagine how much work needs to be happening between now and then, that should give you some kind of indication.
The other thing that I would say on that, is that this is a priority, for the division, but additionally, it's, for each of our units, and so I think that as we look at this and as we get into the, development of the strategic plan, we'll need to have some conversations about, where are the priorities. And this has been a long-standing need that UMGC and Academic Affairs has had. And so we have a lot of work to do. And so I believe that, especially I'm going to speak in the academic school realm, is that the deans will be working, with our colleagues within the schools to, make certain that this remains a priority. And we're going to have to make, decisions about, what is priority and what isn't. And this has to be, one of the top priorities as we move forward.
And I think that adds to the excitement, right? Of we're doing something that we've not done before, right? And so we're going to be learning this as we go. And so, also as you are engaged in this work or whatever, if those types of concerns come up, certainly as Sharon said, you can work with the co-leads for the particular working groups you're on, work with your supervisor and all of that. And, we're going to be as responsive as we can to the needs of the community as we engage in this important work.
The other thing that I get excited about, Jarrett and Pam, is that there has been a lot of work that has already been undertaken, within the division. And so, that work, many of us have undertaken across the division will be a really good springboard for, the kinds of discussions that, we as a community will want to undertake. And so it's not as if we're starting from ground zero at all. I mean, what I'm really looking forward to is that, we'll have the opportunity to learn from, our colleagues, across the division about work that they've undertaken because they saw this need before it became a formal part, of the division and institutional process. So there's a lot that we already have to work from.
Great, thank you all. Excuse me, I don't see any more questions coming in. We have over 100 people on the call this morning, so I encourage you, while we have all of our co-leads here, to ask any questions that you have. For those that were looking for the QR code, we've placed the link to the SharePoint site in the chat, and you can click there directly to see the site that Sharon was describing earlier. And if you have questions after our call today, you can email them to the aadei@umgc.edu email address. So I think the presentation was very thorough this morning. Folks are probably digesting and thinking about how else they'd like to engage with this work. I'll give it one last call for any questions that you might have. And panelists, this is also your last call if there's anything that you'd like to share with the group before we close today.
I think I just want to highlight that, I mentioned it briefly, but this strategic plan is going to guide the work in academic affairs, DEI initiatives over the next 3 years. And so while there may be a quite significant time commitment to participate, I think it will be very much worthwhile because the work that comes out of the strategic plan will definitely have a big impact on what we do for academic affairs in DEI for 3 years, and really sets the pace for what we'll be doing in terms of how we're holding ourselves accountable. So it's not just, here are some things we want to do, but we're going to be thinking deeply about here's how we're going to do them and how are we going to measure our success. That's also going to be a part of this. And how are we going to, then make it so that we can hold ourselves accountable for this work and really see our progress going forward. And so for this inaugural Academic Affairs DEI strategic plan, I hope there will be many who are excited to be a part of it and really help us set the stage for what a more formal, recognizing there's always been work being done in this space, but for a more formal process where we can all look at and view our progress and as we're going along and adjust, right? So it's a living document. We won't get it all right up front, but we'll be working to adjust as we go along. And so people will be making a really significant impact by volunteering to work. And I hope a lot of folks feel like they want to be a part of that.
Me too, Pam, because it is a building process, and we're really laying a foundation and realizing the foundations that have been laid, already before we start this. And so it's an opportunity, this is the kind of work that takes time and it takes, thoughtful consideration. And, conversations aren't necessarily easy. And so I think that we all, individually and as a group, have to be willing to come in and to have the kind of discussion and debate and spirited discussion, that's a part of this. But this is what makes, I think, the academic affairs community such a rich, community. We have a responsibility to do this not only for ourselves, but especially for our students. And this is very much tied to, to the work that we're doing in general education, and so we're not doing these independently of one another. They really come together. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation, that we're going to have and the work that we're going to undertake. It's important that institutions, divisions and units make this a priority, and it doesn't become a systematic, priority unless there is, institutional, commitment from the very, very top. So I'm glad that we're starting to do that. I know that even before I joined UMGC, I was having conversations, with, members of the community, and with Blakely. So I'm really glad to see that we're at this point where we're, realizing, something that has been of a need and interest, of the institution for a long time.
And I
Thank
think,
you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jarrett.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also want to add that the work actually doesn't stop with building the strategic plan, right? So as everyone is thinking about what is the way in which they want to be involved, there are going to be so many dimensions and means for that. Some of the involvement will be shaping the plan that we've talked about today, but the bulk of the work is really going to be in doing the plan. And that will require participation from absolutely everyone in our community. And there will be ample opportunities to engage in that. And so I want everyone to hear that there is a way for you to be involved in a way that feels comfortable for you and accommodates, your means, the time that you can commit, the area of interest. But whether that is helping us to look at some of our policies or helping us to think about how we support faculty in creating inclusive environments in the classroom, or how we look differently at the learning objects to, make sure that we are reflecting our own student community back to them. There will just be multiple opportunities across the board. And so everyone should feel like you can find a place in this work. That's part of what an inclusive process needs to be.
And I think that's what makes it so exciting, is the fact that recognizing that there's so many people in academic affairs who are very passionate about this area, right? And the opportunity to now bring everybody together for a systematic process like this, I think is really exciting. I also think that the other thing that makes this exciting is that, when you think about the history of higher education and who was brought in, and you look now at the faces that are in our university, right? Because when you think about it, I don't think any of us, maybe a handful of us, you think about the genesis of higher education would have been there. And now that we are all here, we have a responsibility to continue opening that door to others, and not just the presence of diverse populations, but also the experience that they're having and feeling like they belong and they're included, and being able to play a role in that, whether it's on a working group or not, is really important work, right? I think about, when you think about choirs, right, and they have these big soaring voices, but it's all individually composed of individual voices who play larger, small parts, but the net total, right, is this great impact. And so I think that's what really excites me, is looking at, how large our community is in academic affairs, and thinking about the impact that we're going to be able to have for our students, our faculty, and our staff. I believe is going to be incredible.
Thank you all. This has given our audience time to ask one more question. Speaking of inclusiveness, how will adjuncts participate in this work?
Well, my expectation is adjuncts can volunteer for the work just like everyone else can volunteer for the work. So this is meant to be an inclusive process, and we want to hear from everyone who would like to participate and make sure that in some way, shape, or form, there is participation. As Blakely mentioned, there's going to be lots of opportunities, but most particularly, I'll just say from the, in terms of, creating the strategic plan and having, folks serve on the different working groups, the more we can have those working groups reflective of everyone who is working at the university in academic affairs, I think the more reflective our plan will be in terms of being able to be successful in gathering all the various perspectives that we need to have those conversations that Sharon referenced.
Thank you, Pam. It looks like we don't have any more questions. Again, I encourage anyone that realizes you have a question after this call to email aadei@umgc.edu. I know I speak for the panelists when I say thank you for taking time, whatever part of the world you're in, for joining us, and for those on the East Coast for an early morning. And thank you, panelists. I have been at the university myself for 13 years now. This is the first time I'm seeing a formal effort in this area, and I too am excited to see this work happen. So again, thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thank you, Nikki. And as we approach the end of today's community town hall, we want to thank each and every one of you for your participation. This is a community effort, and we look forward to working with you. Here's what you can expect as follow-up. Following today's meeting, we will circulate a recording of the webinar in addition to a link to the newly created Academic Affairs, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion SharePoint site. The site will be updated regularly and will include a recap of today's meeting, information on how to get involved, and other helpful resources. You may also contact us, as stated, at aadei@umgc.edu with any questions or comments. We also want to take this time to thank our executive IT staff for their super helpful support with today's session. There's so much preparation that goes on behind the scenes. With that said, have a wonderful day and evening. This concludes our community town hall.